I woke up to the sound of loud banging on my front door, a pounding so intense I half wondered if someone was trying to break in. Groggy and disoriented, I grabbed my phone and stumbled to the door, still wearing my faded t-shirt and mismatched socks. When I opened it, I was met with flashing blue and red lights illuminating my entire front yard, 2 police officers standing sternly on my porch. "Sir, we need to speak with you," one of the officers barked. His face was tense, and his partner kept a hand near his utility belt, fingers twitching near his taser. For a moment, my heart leapt into my throat. Had someone broken into my house? Had there been an accident? But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "We've received a noise complaint about your air conditioner," the officer said flatly. "You need to turn it off immediately." I blinked. My air conditioner? I didn't even own one. I stared at him, baffled, still half asleep. "I don't have an air conditioner," I said slowly. "Sir," the officer continued with growing irritation, "we've received multiple complaints from your neighbor. This is the second time tonight." I rubbed my temples, my brain still trying to catch up. "Who even made the complaint?" I asked. "A Mrs. Karen Harper," he replied. "She's concerned your air conditioner is disturbing the neighborhood." I nearly laughed. "Karen Harper?" I repeated. "She doesn't even live on this street." The officer's eyes narrowed. "We've had enough calls that we had to come down here. If you can show us there's no air conditioner, that would help clear things up." I stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. They swept through my house like I was harboring a fugitive cooling unit. The officers poked their heads into my kitchen, checked my living room, even glanced around my backyard. One officer muttered something about wasting their time before they finally left. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke to find a crumpled note stuffed in my mailbox, scrawled in aggressive handwriting. "Your air conditioner is a menace. Turn it off before I call the cops again." Signed, Karen Harper. The note wasn't even subtle. It felt like a threat. That afternoon, I walked 5 blocks over to confront her. Karen's house was an oversized 2-story home with a perfectly trimmed lawn and those tacky wooden signs that said, "Live, Laugh, Love," near the porch. I knocked, and Karen answered almost instantly, as if she'd been waiting for me. "Oh, it's you," she sneered. Her blonde hair was pinned back so tightly I wondered how she didn't get headaches. "I don't have an air conditioner," I said flatly. "I never have." "Well," Karen huffed, "I hear something, and it's ruining my sleep. If you don't fix it, I'll keep calling the police until you do." "You live 5 blocks away," I shot back. "How can you possibly hear anything from my house?" Karen crossed her arms smugly. "I have very sensitive hearing. I pick up vibrations most people can't." I nearly choked. "Vibrations? Karen, this is ridiculous." She jabbed her finger in my chest. "You think this is funny? We'll see who's laughing when you get fined." For the next week, my life turned into a circus. I'd find more angry notes shoved under my door. Twice, the police showed up again, both times late at night, claiming Karen had called yet again about the mysterious air conditioner noise. The officers were getting annoyed, and so was I. Things got worse. One morning I found my tires slashed. I couldn't prove it was Karen, but my gut screamed her name. Then, another night I spotted her lurking near my property line, phone in hand, whispering into the receiver. When she saw me, she scuttled away like a guilty raccoon. I knew I had to dig deeper. A few conversations with my neighbors revealed Karen's history of bizarre accusations. She once claimed the Johnsons across the street were performing satanic rituals in their garage because they were listening to metal music. She accused the Rodriguez family of running an underground gambling ring just because they hosted poker nights on Fridays. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was obsessive. Determined to end this nonsense, I bought a cheap noise meter from an electronics store and recorded the sound levels in my house. Dead silent. Whatever Karen was hearing wasn't coming from me. That's when I started asking more questions. One neighbor, Mr. Thompson, let something slip. You know Karen's got some weird generator setup going on, right? What do you mean? I asked. He shrugged. She's had this big, rumbling generator behind her garage for months now. Thing sounds like a freight train when it's running. Curious, I decided to check for myself. Late that evening, I drove by Karen's house, windows down. Sure enough, I heard the deep, throaty hum of a generator thumping in the distance. It wasn't coming from my house, it was coming from hers. The revelation made my blood boil. The next morning, I confronted Karen directly. You've been calling the cops on me when the noise is coming from your house. Her face twisted in fake innocence. I don't know what you're talking about. She sniffed. You have a generator running behind your garage, I said. That's what's causing the noise. Not me. Karen's expression flickered, just for a second, from smug to panicked. That's ridiculous, she blurted. I'd know if my own generator was making noise. Would you? I shot back. Because I'm sure the police would love to hear about this. Her face flushed red, and she slammed her door in my face. I thought that was the end of it, but once again, I was wrong. That night, the police were back. Karen had called them claiming I'd tried to break into her house. The officers arrived frustrated and exhausted, and I could barely convince them that I'd been home all night. Meanwhile, Karen stood on her porch in a bathrobe, fake crying like she was starring in a low-budget soap opera. I just want to feel safe in my home, she wailed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout the truth at the officers, but I knew it wouldn't matter without proof. As the squad car pulled away, Karen shot me a smug smile, her eyes glinting with victorious malice. This wasn't over. I was going to find a way to end Karen's reign of chaos, even if it killed me. The morning after Karen's dramatic performance, I knew I couldn't let this nonsense continue. If I didn't stop her now, I'd probably wake up one day to find her accusing me of starting a fire with my heat-emitting microwave waves. I needed proof, hard evidence, to shut her down once and for all. Determined, I grabbed my phone and started asking around the neighborhood. Most people were sympathetic but also hesitant. Karen had a way of intimidating people into silence. A few neighbors shared whispers about her constant complaining, but no one wanted to get involved. It wasn't until I knocked on Mr. Thompson's door that I caught my first real break. I knew this would happen, he grunted after I explained my situation. Karen's been causing problems for years. What do you mean? I asked. He invited me in and grabbed a dusty old folder from a drawer. Inside were printed emails, notes, and even screenshots from a neighborhood forum. Karen had accused the Johnsons of letting their cat stare threateningly at her windows. She once tried to report a family down the street for overwatering their lawn, claiming the runoff was attracting mosquitoes specifically to her property. One note claimed her neighbor's porch light was suspiciously bright and likely used for illuminating criminal activity. She's obsessed with control, Mr. Thompson said. Most people just try to ignore her. Ignoring her clearly wasn't an option for me. Then Mr. Thompson mentioned something even more suspicious, Karen's mysterious backyard generator. He claimed Karen had been running it every night for months, yet she never explained why. What was even stranger, Mr. Thompson said, was that she would often sneak around her own yard late at night, adjusting the generator and whispering on the phone. That gave me an idea. If Karen was so obsessed with sound, maybe I could use that against her. I reached out to my tech-savvy friend Maya, who ran a side business setting up smart home systems and surveillance tech. When I explained the situation, she jumped at the opportunity to help. That evening, Maya set up a small hidden microphone just outside Karen's backyard, where the generator hummed like an angry wasp nest. We also placed a discreet camera facing her back porch. If Karen was up to something, we'd catch it. For the next 2 nights, nothing happened. Karen's generator droned on like usual, and no strange behavior stood out. I started to wonder if I was just being paranoid, until night 3. Around 1 a.m., Maya and I sat watching the live feed on her laptop when Karen finally emerged. Wrapped in a heavy robe and clutching a flashlight, she crept into her yard like a burglar. We watched in stunned silence as she tinkered with her generator, adjusting something inside. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "She's on the phone," I whispered. Maya adjusted the audio, amplifying the sound. Karen's voice came through, shaky but clear. "I think they're starting to suspect something," she hissed. "I've called the cops enough times. They're starting to get annoyed. We need to make it louder." I stared at Maya in disbelief. Karen wasn't just pretending to hear noises, she was creating them. Karen continued whispering into the phone, mentioning some sort of vibration device hidden under her porch that she claimed could project low, steady hums, mimicking the sound of an air conditioner. It was designed to annoy people, and she'd been manipulating it to make it seem like the noise was coming from my property. "I can't believe this," I muttered. "She's literally framing me for a noise she's making herself." "Sounds like she's got someone helping her," Maya added. "You think she's working with someone in the neighborhood?" It didn't seem impossible. Karen had a talent for manipulating people, and if she could convince some poor fool to join her ridiculous scheme, things could get worse. The footage was valuable, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. I needed to catch her red-handed. The next night, Maya and I stayed on watch again, only this time I waited outside in my car. Sure enough, at just past midnight Karen appeared in her backyard. This time, I quietly slipped out of my car and snuck around the side of her property. I stayed low in the shadows as Karen muttered into her phone once again. I could just barely make out her voice. "I'm telling you, I've almost got him," she whispered. "Once the cops find him a couple more times, he'll break. He'll sell the house and I can." She stopped suddenly and spun around. I froze. She squinted toward the side of her yard where I was hiding, her flashlight beam sweeping closer and closer. My heart hammered in my chest as I ducked lower behind some bushes. Karen stood still for a long moment, her face tense and suspicious, before she muttered something under her breath and went back to her generator. I didn't breathe again until I was halfway back to my car. The next morning, I compiled all the evidence, the audio of Karen admitting her scam, the video footage of her messing with her generator, and her suspicious phone calls. I called the police directly and arranged a meeting. When I sat down with the officers, I expected them to be skeptical, but as soon as I played the recording of Karen talking about making the noise louder, their expressions shifted from boredom to serious concern. "We'll handle it," one of them promised. That evening, the officers paid Karen a visit. I watched from across the street as she answered the door, her fake smile plastered on her face. Her expression faltered as the officers started questioning her. One of the officers stepped into her backyard, and within minutes they discovered her modified generator and the vibration device hidden under her porch. Karen's screaming echoed down the street as they confiscated her equipment. She tried to play the victim, claiming she'd been forced into it by some imaginary neighbor plotting against her. When that failed, she tried to turn on the waterworks. The officers weren't buying it. Later that night, as I relaxed with Maya, I couldn't help but feel relieved. The nightmare was finally over. Karen's lies had spiraled out of control, and she'd been exposed. The police warned her that further harassment would lead to charges, and most of the neighborhood celebrated quietly when they heard the news. But the victory felt hollow. As I stood on my porch that night, I spotted Karen staring out her window. Her eyes locked onto mine, cold and furious. She raised her hand and mimed a phone call, a clear warning that she wasn't finished. I knew I'd won the battle. But the war with Karen Harper? That wasn't over yet. In the days that followed Karen's humiliating exposure, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I could sit in my living room without constantly glancing at the window expecting to see flashing police lights or Karen skulking around my property. The neighborhood was buzzing with gossip about her latest stunt, and while most people shook their heads in disbelief, there was an undeniable satisfaction that someone had finally stood up to her. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the type to let things go quietly. It started with small things at first. I'd wake up to find garbage cans mysteriously knocked over in my driveway or footprints in my garden that clearly weren't mine. One morning, I found my mailbox door bent backward like someone had tried to force it open. I couldn't prove it was Karen, but I knew it had her fingerprints all over it. The smug look she wore whenever I passed her house was proof enough that she was still holding a grudge. A week after the police incident, things escalated. I woke up one morning to find an official-looking envelope taped to my door. Inside was a letter from some supposed homeowners committee, claiming that my property was violating noise ordinances. They claimed my television was too loud, my music was disruptive, and my frequent yelling was disturbing the peace. It was absurd. I lived alone and barely made enough noise to disturb anyone. The letter conveniently suggested I either reduce noise immediately or face possible legal action. I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen had fabricated the whole thing, hoping to harass me under a fake official title. I asked around the neighborhood, but no one had ever heard of this so-called committee. When I confronted Karen directly, she played dumb, smiling sweetly like she hadn't been caught rigging her generator just days earlier. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said in her usual syrupy voice. "But if you're causing disturbances, the neighborhood has every right to take action." I turned to leave, but her voice followed me. "You should really be more careful," she added with a chilling smile. "You never know who's watching." The next night, the real trouble began. Around midnight, I was startled awake by the sound of someone pounding on my door. When I answered, 2 police officers stood on my porch, looking tired and annoyed. They claimed Karen had called them, insisting I had been screaming profanities and blasting heavy metal music at full volume. I invited them in, proving once again that my house was silent and peaceful. The officers apologized but warned that Karen was pushing to have a noise complaint filed against me. 2 nights later, it happened again. And then again the following night. Each time, Karen escalated her story, once claiming I'd been throwing glass bottles at her property and another time insisting I'd tried to break into her garage. The officers, clearly fed up with her nonsense, became less interested in her reports, but the tension in the neighborhood was rising. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. If she couldn't trick the cops into harassing me, she'd wear me down until I couldn't take it anymore. The breaking point came one evening when I returned home from work to find my front door wide open. My stomach dropped as I crept inside, half expecting to find my furniture overturned or my belongings ransacked. Surprisingly, nothing was stolen, but I noticed subtle changes: a drawer left open in the kitchen, my bookshelf slightly rearranged. It felt like someone had walked through my home just to leave their mark. I knew it was Karen. She hadn't taken anything, she wanted me to feel vulnerable. That night, I barely slept, half expecting her to appear at my window with a twisted smile. I knew I needed to fight back smarter. Maya and I brainstormed, determined to find something that would end this nightmare once and for all. That's when Maya had the idea. Karen had already used fake evidence to manipulate the police before. What if she tried it again? If I could catch her planting fake proof, I'd finally have enough leverage to shut her down for good. We set up 2 hidden cameras, one on my front porch and another near the side of my house. Maya even rigged an old Bluetooth speaker in my yard, set to play faint buzzing sounds that mimicked air conditioning noise. If Karen was bold enough to approach my property, we'd catch her red-handed. Sure enough, 2 nights later, the cameras recorded exactly what I expected. Just after 2 a.m., Karen appeared on the side of my house, crouched low with a small black device in her hand. She crept near my window, carefully placing the device beneath one of my outdoor lights. Then, she stood back and grinned, a twisted, satisfied smile. The device was a small speaker, rigged to emit a low vibrating hum, just loud enough to simulate an annoying noise. She had planned to call the cops once again, claiming I'd turned my air conditioner back on. The next morning, I marched straight to the police station with the footage in hand. The officers watched the video with growing frustration, clearly fed up with Karen's antics. This time, they didn't just warn her. They issued her a citation for harassment and filing false police reports. Karen exploded when they confronted her, screaming about conspiracies and claiming the entire neighborhood was out to get her. When they tried to calm her down, she shoved one of the officers, landing herself in handcuffs right there on her porch. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't finished. While awaiting her court date, she began spreading rumors online. She created fake social media accounts and posted outrageous claims that I was running an illegal business from my house, that I was spying on the neighbors, and even that I had connections to criminals. Most of the neighborhood ignored her nonsense, but some curious onlookers believed her, and soon my mailbox was flooded with nasty letters and anonymous threats. Despite everything, I refused to back down. I gathered statements from my neighbors, people who had seen Karen stalking my house or overheard her manipulative phone calls. The day of her court hearing, I walked in prepared. Karen had shown up with a folder of fake noise complaints and fabricated evidence. But when my lawyer presented the camera footage, the judge's patience evaporated. Karen's face went pale as the video played, her sneaking into my yard, planting the noise device, whispering into her phone about her plan. The judge didn't hesitate to issue a restraining order, barring Karen from approaching my house or contacting me in any way. She was also fined for harassment, and warned that another false report would result in criminal charges. As I walked out of the courtroom, Karen shot me a glare so intense I swore I could feel her hatred burning into my back. But as I drove home that day, I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, my house felt like a safe place again. The noise was gone. The police calls had stopped. Karen's obsession had finally cost her, and I knew she wouldn't dare try it again. Or so I thought. A few days later, a postcard appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Scrawled across the front were 5 simple words. "You haven't seen the last of me." The handwriting was unmistakable. Karen might have been quiet for now, but deep down, I knew her twisted mind was already working on her next move. Life finally seemed to be returning to normal after Karen's courtroom defeat. The restraining order kept her away from my property, and the neighbors seemed to collectively breathe a sigh of relief knowing her antics had finally been exposed. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could relax. The quiet hum of my home, the comfort of my own space, and the absence of Karen's drama felt like a long-lost luxury. But that postcard she had sent still gnawed at me. Those 5 words, "You haven't seen the last of me," played in my head like a scratched record. I tried to dismiss it as empty bravado, but deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the type to let go of a grudge. Days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. Part of me started to believe she had finally given up. She avoided the neighborhood entirely, likely to stay out of trouble until her court date was fully settled. But despite her absence, a faint sense of unease lingered. I kept expecting something to happen, and that tension clung to me like a second skin. Then, one evening, my neighbor Mr. Thompson knocked on my door. He looked concerned, holding a crumpled flyer in his hand. He handed it to me without a word. The flyer claimed my house had recently been the site of dangerous criminal activity, and warned people to stay away. It claimed I had been involved in illicit dealings, suggesting my home was some sort of criminal hideout. The flyer even had a fake photo of me digitally altered to look like I was holding stacks of cash in a dimly lit room. The text was bold and dramatic, clearly meant to stir panic. There was no doubt in my mind, this had Karen's fingerprints all over it. I spent the next 2 days collecting flyers from various porches and mailboxes. They were everywhere, stapled to telephone poles, taped on bus stops, even posted inside the local grocery store's bulletin board. The damage was immediate. A few neighbors started avoiding me altogether. Some whispered when I walked by. I overheard Mrs. Hendricks across the street warning her grandchildren to stay away from that man's house. Karen had poisoned the well yet again. Determined to confront her directly, I drove past her house only to find it eerily silent. Her blinds were shut, and her car was gone. I asked around, and no one had seen her in days. I figured she was hiding out until the chaos she stirred had time to settle. Unfortunately, her damage lingered. The next blow hit harder. Late one evening, a truck rolled up outside my house. A man in a black hoodie climbed out and started unloading boxes right onto my driveway. Confused, I stepped outside. "You can't leave that here," I said. "You're Jake, right?" the man asked. "Yes," I said slowly. "Cool," he replied with a shrug. "I'm just dropping off your order." He motioned to the stack of boxes, each one filled with sketchy electronics, wires, and random gear that screamed black market parts. "I didn't order this," I said. "Not my problem," the guy muttered, dropping an invoice on top of the boxes. "Paid in full, no refunds." Before I could argue, he jumped back into his truck and sped away. Panicked, I looked over the invoice. The shipping address was mine, but the name listed was Jacob the Dealer Thompson. I knew exactly what had happened. Karen wasn't just spreading rumors anymore, she was actively planting fake evidence. She had set me up to look like I was involved in something shady. Desperate to clear this up before someone called the police, I grabbed my phone and called Maya. She arrived within minutes. Together, we sorted through the boxes. It was a bizarre collection: tangled wiring, half-built circuit boards, a few outdated cell phones, and random junk that looked vaguely criminal but had no real value. Maya suspected Karen had ordered it all from multiple shady websites just to make it look convincing. I couldn't prove Karen had done it directly, but the pattern was unmistakable. Determined to shut her down for good, Maya helped me contact the websites used to place the orders. After some digging, Maya found that the orders had all been placed under an anonymous email account, but with Karen's address as the billing location. That was enough evidence for me. I brought everything: the invoices, the digital records, and a folder full of Karen's past behavior, straight to the police. This time, they didn't hesitate. Karen's previous behavior had already put her on thin ice, and now she was linked to direct harassment and fraudulent activity. 2 days later, Karen's house was swarming with officers. I watched from my front window as they escorted her down her driveway, shouting protests and claiming she was being set up. Her face was red with fury, and she flailed her arms wildly like she was about to explode. Despite her theatrics, it was over. Karen was arrested and charged with multiple counts of harassment, filing false police reports, and fraud. She was ordered to pay fines and sentenced to mandatory counseling. The judge even extended the restraining order to keep her away from me for the foreseeable future. In the days that followed, the neighborhood seemed to wake up from a long nightmare. The tension was gone, and people started to relax again. Mr. Thompson even organized a small barbecue, jokingly calling it a Karen-free celebration. The evening was filled with laughter, and for the first time in months, I felt like my home was truly mine again. But Karen wasn't completely gone. Weeks later, I received another anonymous letter in the mail. No name, no address, just a simple handwritten note that read, "I'll be back sooner than you think." I crumpled it in my hand and tossed it in the trash, refusing to let her paranoia seep back into my life. I realized then that Karen thrived on chaos, but I wasn't going to let her rule my life anymore. If she tried to come back, I'd be ready. For now, I had my home, my peace, and the knowledge that I had faced her twisted schemes head-on, and won. The nightmare might not be over, but I wasn't afraid of her anymore.